Minister Hansen, on CKNW today, you went on at length about how the fact the civil service stands down during elections, so they don't do much. So I'm just wondering how it is you came to have conversations with Graham Whitmarsh about the fact that revenues were under pressure.
So the Deputy Minister called me on a couple of occasions during the election campaign around certain issues that he was faced with, and I responded to those calls. It is not normal for ministers to seek advice from the public service on issues that are part of the election campaign. That there are issues that obviously where the deputy has to talk to a minister at all times, and ministers, quite frankly, have to be available to step back into their ministerial role even during election campaign.
Couldn't you have talked to Tom Christensen?
No, it's entirely appropriate for a deputy minister in certain circumstances to contact a minister, and in fact there are certain circumstances where a minister can contact the deputy. But what's inappropriate is for a minister who in the middle of election campaign is seeking re-election to seek advice and guidance from the public service on issues that are relevant to the election campaign itself.
What was the revenue shortfall? When he broke the news to you that revenues were falling to the tune of $300 million, why wouldn't you pass that along to the Premier?
Well, because what he indicated was that there were indicators that might suggest that revenues might be off by $200 to $300 million. I knew that that was totally manageable within the budget plan that we had tabled in February. So when we talk about $200 to $300 million, you're talking about 1/2% of the budget revenues of the province. So what I also knew at the time was that the ministries, even before the election, had started on a process of identifying reductions in discretionary spending, and I signaled that. In fact, we had instructed that at the time of the February budget, and I was quite public about that in February, that we would be seeking additional reductions in discretionary spending over and above what was flagged at the time of the February budget. So, a $200 million reduction in revenue, that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but I also knew that that was totally manageable within the budget plan that we had tabled.
We've got time for two more questions.
On May that was also said within the context of a world economy that was going downhill quickly. Other provinces were posting huge deficits. We were asking about our deficit and the credibility of those numbers, both to you and to the Premier. Would it not have been good to either tell the public or the Premier that, hey, things are a little rocky here?
No, actually, it was totally manageable within the budget plan that we had. So at no time during that period of time did finance officials suggest to me that $495 million deficit was not doable, because they knew, it's not like we had detailed discussions, but I knew well, let me put it this way, at no time did the ministry suggest to any of us that a $495 million deficit was not doable, because as I now know that in discussions that we've had with ministry officials subsequent to the election, is that they fully expected that a $295 million deficit was doable right through the period of the election.
Time for one more question.
On May 12th, what was the budget revenue shortfall that they told you about? You said they did the actual numbers. What was that shortfall?
Yeah, so we actually run the formal budget analysis about 4 times a year, and that's looking in detail at what the expenditure projections are and what the revenue projections are. So they did that work in the early part of May. They actually finished it on election day so that they would be in a position to brief either a new government and a new finance minister, or brief a returning government with the latest numbers available. And it was at that time that, even to their surprise, they realized that the revenues were actually down more than they had expected. And that was actually the tune of about $1.1 billion.
And you still thought you could sustain that? Because you were still maintaining up until June that everything was fine and 495 was solid.
No, so actually at that point we realized there was big pressure on the 495. We still could have done it. We still had the options of looking at revenue reductions, at expenditure reductions. We had the option of looking at revenue increases, and we had the option of a bigger deficit. So in the period, actually in the second half of May, that was a discussion that we were having internally with Ministry and and I certainly had those discussions with the Premier.
But I also remember you had
in-
the cabinet shuffle
Okay,
talking about
I was just getting to that. On June the 10th, when I indicated up at Government House that a $495 million deficit was still doable, what I had the information that I had at that time, which we learned only at the end of May, is that we would actually, if we adopted HST, have access to $1.6 billion of federal money. And at that time, actually, we had the expectation that we would have to take all of that 1.6 in this fiscal year. It's only subsequent to that we've learned the flexibility that the federal government
Is this
showed.
giving you a
Thank you,
massive
folks.
credibility
Minister, you
problem?
need to get going.
So I do have to get back to the House. So
Do you have a
thanks very much.
credibility problem, Minister? Does this government have a credibility problem?